Final adapted script. Something strange happened at Wimbledon after Alex Eala left. The matches kept being played. The scores kept getting posted. The draw kept narrowing toward its final the way it always does. On paper, nothing changed. But the atmosphere did. Before I show you exactly what shifted, and why people who don't even follow tennis are still talking about it, hit subscribe and drop a comment with the country you're watching from. It genuinely helps this channel, and I read everyone. You're watching YFFECTOSHORTS, and this one isn't really about a tennis result. People kept talking about the player, who wasn't there anymore. Not the way fans usually mourn an early exit, not sadness about a gap in the bracket. They talked about her the way you talk about something that changed the feeling of a room, something whose absence suddenly makes you realize how present it actually was. The conversation around Wimbledon had quietly rearranged itself around a 21-year-old from Quezon City who had already packed her bags and flown home. And that alone tells you something a scoreline or a ranking can never fully capture. So let's go back to the start of the fortnight, because what Alex built at the All England club didn't appear fully formed. It grew, match by match, and by the time her run ended in the fourth round, staff who'd worked this tournament for years said they'd never quite experienced anything like it. The first signs showed up in the practice courts. Normally, that's the territory of the truly devoted, a few rows of hardcore fans catching a warm-up before the real matches start. When Alex practiced, the numbers stopped making sense. People lined up several rows deep just to watch routine forehands and serve drills, the least glamorous version of tennis there is, because simply being near her felt worth the time. Staff who'd worked multiple Wimbledons started noticing the pattern immediately. That kind of crowd isn't manufactured. Nobody ran a campaign to get people watching practice sessions. They showed up because they wanted to be there. Then there were the flags. If you were on the grounds during her run and actually looked around instead of just watching the court, you'd have seen them everywhere, not clustered in one section, but scattered across the entire site. Red, blue, and yellow, carried by people who'd flown in from the Philippines and from Filipino communities across Europe because they sensed before most of the tennis world caught up that something historic was building, and they weren't going to watch it secondhand if they had any choice. Getting into Wimbledon isn't easy. The queue is famous for a reason, people sleeping on London pavements overnight for tickets that can't be bought any other way. These fans did all of that anyway. And when Alex won her second-round match and thanked them in Tagalog at the microphone, the response from the stands was the kind that makes even people with zero emotional stake feel something. Here's the thing about what she built. It wasn't exclusive. It spread past the Filipino community that came to support her, past the tennis diehards who'd followed her for months. It reached people with no connection to the Philippines and no history with women's tennis at all, people who tuned in because a clip found them in their feed and made them stop scrolling. That on-court interview after she beat the defending champion is worth sitting with, because it's the actual reason this became bigger than a tennis result. She stood at the microphone after the biggest win of her career and talked about being a kid, going to the courts every day after school with her brother and her grandfather, ruffled socks, light-up shoes, chubby cheeks, a love for the game that had nothing sophisticated about it. She said a result like this might be a footnote for some players, but for someone who grew up where she grew up, it was everything. Then she pivoted. Told the crowd she wasn't satisfied. Next round, let's go. That combination, total emotional honesty followed immediately by forward drive, isn't something you can coach into someone. It either lives in you or it doesn't. It clearly lives in her, and people recognized something real in it, shared it, and pulled in viewers who had never watched a full tennis match in their lives. Back home, the numbers told their own story. Watch parties packed with families gathering at hours that required real sacrifice, early mornings or late nights depending on the time difference with London, and people showed up anyway, wrapped in the flag, watching together, celebrating together. When the run ended in the fourth round after a three-set battle lasting over 2 hours that could have gone either way, the grief that followed was the specific kind that only shows up when the investment was real. You don't feel that about something you were only half interested in. And within a short time, that grief turned into something else. Pride. Not the consolation kind, real, specific pride, because what had actually happened was extraordinary. Alex became the first Filipino player in the Open era to reach the fourth round of a Grand Slam. She beat the defending Wimbledon champion on center court. She committed only 21 unforced errors against 44 from one of the most disciplined players in the sport. She saved set points in an 84-minute first-set tiebreak, winning it 11-9. Then, 2 days later, she competed for over 2 hours against a former Grand Slam finalist. Those aren't consolation numbers. Those are the numbers of a player who belongs at the top of the sport. The run ending doesn't erase any of that. Every run ends eventually. The real question is what it built, and what it left behind is considerable. It set a new benchmark for Filipino tennis. Before this summer, no Filipino player had done this. Now one has. Every kid in the Philippines who picks up a racket has a different reference point for what's possible, not because someone told them, because they watched it happen. That's a different kind of permission entirely. The kind words alone can never fully deliver. And how she carried the fame throughout the tournament was its own part of the story. Fame at this speed can turn people into a managed version of themselves. Alex didn't seem to experience any of that. Same person in press conferences as in on-court interviews as in the casual Instagram story with a friend standing next to the Princess of Wales. Caption like, someone just having the best week of her life. Other players talked about her the way you talk about someone you genuinely like, not someone you're professionally obligated to respect. That's a different, more meaningful kind of endorsement. On the court itself, her movement stood out immediately, tracking down balls most players would concede as unreachable, without the desperate scrambling that usually comes with defensive retrieving. Her anticipation is a real weapon even though it never shows up in a stat sheet. She makes opponents hit one shot more than they expect to, and at this level, that extra shot is exactly where errors come from. There's also a clearly identified area for growth, and it came from one of the most respected voices the sport has ever produced. Martina Navratilova pointed out that Alex's serve is running well below its ceiling, that she has the physical tools to hit considerably faster, and that she isn't yet fully using the natural edge that left-handed serving creates against right-handed opponents. Coming from someone who built a legendary career on an elite serve and volley game, that's not criticism. That's a blueprint. The hardcourt swing opens in Washington in late July, and the U.S. Open follows in late August, the same event where she won the junior title back in 2022, this time walking into the professional draw as a player every opponent takes seriously and prepares for specifically. She heads into that stretch with a global support base watching every point, and with a technical gap so clearly mapped out that the weeks between now and Washington become the most purposeful training stretch of her career. The tournament that carried on after she left is still being played. A champion will be crowned. Wimbledon will celebrate its winner the way it always does. But the conversation that followed Alex out of the grounds about what she built and what she changed suggests her impact on this fortnight will outlast the result itself. That doesn't happen often. Most players, even the very good ones, compete and go home, and the tournament simply closes around the space they occupied. But what Alex changed about what Filipino tennis means, about how over 100 million people suddenly related to a sport that never had a reason to claim them before, about what the ceiling looks like for young players across Southeast Asia, that doesn't fade the way results do. She arrived at Wimbledon as one of the most promising young players in the sport. She left it as something different, not just a prospect anymore. A presence. A player who fills practice courts, earns standing ovations in defeat, and inspires midnight watch parties across an ocean, and somehow makes the tournament feel different the moment she's gone. You don't win that in a fourth-round match. You build that across a career. Alex has been building it for years, and Wimbledon just showed the world how much was already there. She told that crowd 4 words after the biggest win of her career. Next round, let's go. Wherever it happens next, it's already on its way. If this changed how you see her run, let me know in the comments, and subscribe so you catch the next one before anyone else.